Hi, I'm Dr. Chad Larson. Thanks for joining me in another episode of Keep It Real. I've been treating a lot of people lately with what I'd call stress-related issues, and there's a variety of signs and symptoms that we manifest when we've been influenced by a variety of stressors. Some of the stressors you'd be familiar with, things like family relationship issues, work-life issues, and balancing work and family life situations. But we're also, I think, influenced by global stressors and things that aren't really within our immediate environment. But today we are connected globally via the internet and so forth. And I think a lot of people are continually seeing a variety of news feeds, whether it's on the TV or the internet or the device. We're connected all the time. And so I think there's sort of a collective consciousness, maybe we'd say it, that we could all feel some of the same stressors, even though we might be thousands of miles away from different issues that are happening. So anyhow, a lot of people are feeling the stress, and it can manifest in a whole variety of ways. I'll get to what I mean specifically physiologically about stress, and I'm going to talk about the adrenal glands in just a moment. But some of the symptoms that you might be experiencing stress is things like sleep issues, energy issues like fatigue or low energy being one of them, anxiety, depression, heart palpitations, other issues in the body like thyroid issues, or just other hormonal imbalances. Some of these hormones influence the immune system. So some people might get sick more frequently, or when they get sick, the symptoms might last longer than what would be typical for them. And so there's a whole variety of symptoms that can manifest multisystemically, meaning in multiple organ systems, from the brain and cognitive issues and things like I already mentioned, like anxiety, depression, to gastrointestinal problems where the GI tract is just not quite functioning the way that it has in the recent past for you. So there's a whole variety of symptoms that seem like they are not interconnected, but they really can be. And this is just the way the stress type physiology works in the body. And so what I mean by stress physiology really is the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands are little glands that sit right on top of your kidneys. And there's two of them, one on top of each kidney. And they're about 5 grams in weight, which is about the size of a walnut. And so they're pretty small, but they're just a powerhouse of hormones, and they release a lot of hormones for a whole variety of things. And the adrenal glands are kind of separated into two separate components of the adrenal gland. The outer part, which actually makes up about 90% of the gland, is called the cortex, and then on the inside we have the medulla, and those different areas produce different hormones. Some of the hormones you've probably heard of. On the cortex we have cortisol and another hormone called DHEA, which is one of the these are all steroid hormones, meaning that they have a similar steroid structure that is really ultimately derived from cholesterol, which is the building block of these steroid hormones. And so in the cortex we have cortisol, DHEA, another lesser known one called aldosterone, and then in the middle of the adrenal gland is the adrenal medulla. And the adrenal medulla produces other hormones that we call catecholamines that have names like epinephrine and norepinephrine. And you've probably heard of the more common term for epinephrine, which is adrenaline. And so these hormones are produced for a whole variety of reasons, but there's kind of 3 main categories of, let's call them stressors, that influence the adrenal glands. And they are physical stressors like an unresolved injury or poor posture that puts stress and pain on the system. on your musculoskeletal system. There could be chemical stress. Chemical stress we're going to go into in just a moment, but chemical stress can be things like blood sugar imbalances. You know, skipping meals so the blood sugar drops too low, that can be a stressor to the system. Other chemicals could be environmental chemicals that we're exposed to. And then the last category is the one that you're probably more familiar with, which is like the mental emotional stressors. And that's the kind of stress when you say, oh, I'm stressed out. That's mental emotional stress. And all those different types of stressors all can influence and, let's say, tap the adrenal glands. And so if you get enough of those things coming together, that could really work the whole adrenal system in a way that could lead to imbalances and pathology. And there's a broader kind of physiological concept that I want to talk to you about, and that's called the HPA axis. So the H is the hypothalamus, which is in the brain. The P is the pituitary gland, that's also in the brain. And then the A is the adrenal, and that sits just on top of the kidneys. And so the HPA axis is what we call it. The hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis is really what we're talking about here. And when these different stressors influence our body, they're really affecting the whole HPA axis. So in conventional medicine, really there's just a couple different conditions of the adrenal glands that we're taught. And the two main conditions are Addison's disease and Cushing's disease. And Addison's is a very low functioning adrenal state, and Cushing's is a very high acting adrenal state. And they both have a common denominator, and that's autoimmunity. They're both autoimmune diseases, and they're both pretty rare, so they're not that common. And so looking at health and disease in black and white with regard to the HPA axis, we would either say, you know, a person is either healthy or they have Addison's or they have Cushing's. But in reality, there is multiple shades of gray when it comes to the health of the HPA axis. And so that's been broadened into kind of a new concept, or it shouldn't be new, it's been around for a long time, but let's say there's a broadening understanding of this concept, which we would call HPA axis dysfunction. So it doesn't quite fit a pathological model like Addison's or Cushing's disease, but it comes with a whole set of symptoms that people can be suffering from. And there's a variety of ways to evaluate for these, but what I want to mention a little bit about that today are some things that you should look out for, and some things that you might want to consider doing if you find out that you do have HPA axis dysfunction. And so kind of the key way that we evaluate for HPA dysfunction is by looking at a person's cortisol levels and also their DHEA. This could be done as a blood test, this could be done as a urine test, this could be done as a salivary test. Cortisol and DHEA can be evaluated in all those different tissues in the body. So there's a whole variety of ways that they can be evaluated, but then we put that information together with how the person is presenting, what their symptoms are. And so if you think you might fall into this category of dysfunction of the HPA axis, I would strongly recommend that you get tested and then you follow appropriate treatment. So one of my goals with this show is always to challenge the status quo and to offer, let's say, alternative concepts to how the human body works. Because isn't it kind of strange that you probably know more about how your automobile works or about how your computer works than how your body works? That's weird, right? Like, we've just left it to the doctors, like, oh, let's let those people study the body, and then I'll go visit them when I have a problem, and they'll tell me what the problem is, and they'll give me a solution. But it just makes sense. I mean, this thing that you're living in, you should really have a broader understanding. I don't think we need to really speak down to people who haven't gone to medical school. I think we need to level the playing field a little bit, and people need to become educated on just basic physiological functions and what it really takes to keep the body healthy. And so the HPA axis is one of those things that I think you need to become familiar with. And you don't have to study the microanatomy and the microphysiology of how the adrenals work, but just knowing that, first of all, there is an HPA axis and it can be influenced by a variety of things, and that there's symptoms that go along with that we could recognize and that you can get treatment for. So first of all, we want to recognize some of these common symptoms that you might be experiencing that tell us that your body has started to have some dysfunction of the HPA axis. And I mentioned those before, but I'll just go over them again a little bit. Sleeping problems is a really common symptom of adrenal gland dysfunction. Also fatigue and energy problems. You'd also want to think about things like hormone imbalances related to your immune system. Even your female hormone imbalances or your male hormone imbalances, those could be influenced by the adrenal glands. Having more infections or getting colds more often than you would typically would, or if you get an infection, it lasts longer than it typically would. So there's a whole variety, gastrointestinal issues, anxiety, depression, brain fog. These are all symptoms that could be related to dysfunction of the HPA axis. So since stressors can be part of the key component to the function of the adrenal glands, that's part of the treatment. It's kind of three categories of treatment for the adrenal gland imbalances, and that is lifestyle, certain dietary things, and then let's call it targeted nutritional supplementation. So from the lifestyle aspect, it's about managing the stressors, about managing the stresses in your life, helping to really foster healthy relationships and trying to avoid unhealthy relationships, taking time for relaxing the mind. Maybe it's meditation or prayer or yoga, or going for a walk out in nature like I'm doing right now. There's a whole variety of things that can really help to relax the body. In that lifestyle section, I would also consider exercise. Exercise is absolutely phenomenal for de-stressing the body and helping to modulate the function of the HPA axis. So things like that are really important sort of lifestyle wise. On the dietary aspect, and let me emphasize, actually I can't overemphasize how important diet is for supporting the function of the HPA axis, because here's the reason why. Cortisol is one of the main adrenal hormones that is related to stress, and this is one of the hormones that we evaluate to quantify the degree of dysfunction in a person's HPA axis. And cortisol has two main jobs. One of them is to balance the blood sugar in the system, glucose, and the other one is it's anti-inflammatory. And so if chronic pain, joint pain, muscle pain is a common symptom of adrenal gland imbalance and blood sugar fluctuations. People who get very irritable when they miss a meal, or they get even kind of anxious or get kind of anxiety if they miss a meal, or if you wake up in the middle of the night and you feel like you're having a heart attack because your heart's racing and you feel sweaty and you feel like you're having a panic attack, that could be a sign that you have an adrenal gland problem. And so the adrenal glands control blood sugar and they control our anti-inflammatory system. Cortisol is very anti-inflammatory. So when we are trying to balance the adrenal glands, one of the super key therapeutic opportunities that we have is your diet. So every time your blood sugar drops, that's a pretty key stressor to your adrenal glands. So one of the ways to support the adrenal glands is to not let your blood sugar drop. And the most important thing, and again, I can't overemphasize, in fact, I would even say this: if you don't follow these dietary recommendations for adrenal support, the adrenals literally just won't recover. The balance and rhythm to the adrenal glands just won't recover. Because you've heard of maybe the circadian rhythm. That comes from the adrenal glands. Cortisol starts out high in the morning and then slowly drops down as the day goes on, and then it's very low before you go to bed at night. And that happens day after day. At least that's what's supposed to happen in a normal cortisol rhythm. And when this is disrupted, then there's imbalances in that cortisol. Maybe it's very low in the morning when it's supposed to be high, or maybe it's high at night when it's supposed to be low. So by making certain food choices, that can influence the way your body produces cortisol. So the most important thing that you can do in the morning is have some protein. You got to have protein with breakfast, and I would suggest doing that within 30 to 60 minutes of waking, so that you start to influence your cortisol system right away. And if you do this for a period of time, several weeks, it'll really start to improve that HPA axis, and cortisol will start to recover. This is also considering that you're managing the other stressors that might be causing the dysfunction in the adrenal glands. So diet is really, really key. Got to have protein in the morning, and then have a little bit of protein throughout the day. Instead of having 2 or 3 main meals a day, you should probably break it up into 5 or 6 different meals with a little bit of protein, kind of a decreasing amount of protein as the day goes on. More protein in the morning, less protein at night, and that will go along the rhythm of the adrenal glands. So diet is absolutely key. And as far as targeted nutritional supplementation, there are a variety of herbal adaptogens, is what we call them. There's a whole family of herbs that are called adaptogens, and what they do is they help the body adapt to certain internal and environmental stressors. And so these herbs have different names, like Eleutherococcus. The ginseng family are adaptogenic herbs. Rhodiola is a good adaptogenic herb. Schizandra is another good adaptogenic herb. So there's a whole variety of these herbs, and they've been studied to help us understand that really what they're influencing is they're influencing the integrity or moderating the activity of the HPA axis. And so that's how they are adrenal supportive. Also, certain nutrients are required by the adrenal glands to make these hormones. So there's kind of upstream building blocks, like pregnenolone is one of the kind of mother hormones to all the downstream hormones. And for your body to convert these upstream hormones into downstream hormones, there's certain nutrient cofactors that your body needs, like certain B vitamins. Pantothenic acid or vitamin B5 is a key one. Zinc, manganese, magnesium. There's a whole variety of nutrients. Vitamin C are all very important for hormone production in the adrenal glands. So those are usually part of the protocol. And so as far as targeted nutritional supplementation, we usually use some combination of those nutrients. And so the idea is that I want you to just become aware. I really want to demystify what happens physiologically with the body, and some of these symptoms that people are having that might seem, oh, you know, I got to go see the neurologist because I'm having neurological issues, or I got to go see the psychologist or psychiatrist because I'm having anxiety and depression. Sometimes there's a common denominator between all these different symptoms, and one thing I would strongly encourage that you have evaluated is the function of your HPA axis. So I hope you learned something. I hope that you're able to get the help that you need, and we'll see you next time. Until then, keep it real.